The wind carried the sound of a baby crying across the barren plain, thin and sharp like a wounded bird. The man on horseback reined in hard, his mare pawing at the dry earth as her ears twitched toward the sound. He sat still, hand tight on the reins, scanning the landscape of sage and scattered mesquite. There was no one out here. There never was, but the crying kept on, weak and uneven, as if the desert itself was trying to draw him closer. He dismounted, boots crunching on the brittle ground, and followed the sound toward a low rise. As he crested it, he saw her, kneeling in the dust, her dress torn and sun-bleached, hair hanging in tangled ropes around her face. Her arms cradled a bundle swaddled in dirty cloth. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Not a word. The man froze. She turned her face up to him, and in that moment he understood. Her tongue was gone. The baby let out another thin cry, and she rocked it gently, eyes never leaving his. He swallowed hard. "God help me," he muttered, voice breaking against the dry wind. But let's go back to where it all started. His name was Eli Cade, and he'd been living out on the edge of Texas Hill Country for near on 10 years, raising cattle on land too rocky for most men to bother with. The Civil War had left him with nothing but a scar running across his ribs and a silence that most folks in town found unsettling. He wasn't mean, but he wasn't friendly either, just a man who kept to himself, worked hard, and spent his evenings staring at the horizon like he was waiting for something that never came. The town of Archers Bend lay half a day's ride south. Folks there knew Eli as the kind of man who would show up when a fence line needed fixing or a calf went missing, but he never lingered after the work was done. People liked him, but no one really knew him. That morning had been like any other. He'd saddled up before dawn, driving a small herd down toward the creek pasture. The air smelled of cedar and dust, the sky just beginning to burn pink along the horizon. He'd stopped for water at a spring-fed trough he'd built years ago, wiping the sweat from his brow and listening to the distant calls of meadowlarks. Nothing in that quiet morning hinted that his life was about to change. It was near noon when he first heard the crying. At first, he thought it might be a coyote pup or some other critter, but the longer he listened, the more it sounded like a baby. Against his better judgment, he rode toward the sound, heart thudding in his chest. When he saw her, kneeling in the dust with that tiny bundle in her arms, he felt the ground tilt beneath him. She was rail-thin, her bare feet cut and bloody, her dress ragged. Her face was sunburned, lips cracked, and her dark eyes were hollow with exhaustion. She looked Comanche, maybe Apache. It was hard to tell, and Eli wasn't about to ask. Her mouth moved, forming shapes that should have been words, but nothing came out. Then he saw it, where her tongue should have been. There was only empty, scarred flesh. Eli's stomach turned. Whoever had done this to her hadn't just wanted her quiet, they'd wanted her powerless. The baby whimpered again, a frail little sound that didn't belong in this cruel country. Eli knelt down slowly, holding his hands out like a man trying not to spook a wild animal. "Easy now," he murmured. "I'm not gonna hurt you." She flinched but didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at him with something that wasn't quite fear, more like a plea. Eli glanced around. There was no one else. No horse. No tracks leading away. Whoever she'd been with was long gone. He could ride back to town, tell Marshal Dugan what he'd found. But Archer's Bend wasn't a kind place for someone like her. Folks would call her savage, maybe worse. And the baby? Eli stared at the child, tiny fists waving weakly from inside the swaddle. He felt something stir deep in his chest, something he hadn't felt since before the war, back when life had meant more than just surviving the day. He took a slow breath. "All right," he said softly, like he was making a promise to himself. "Come on, let's get you out of this sun." He reached out a hand. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Then, finally, with a trembling arm, she placed her hand in his. It was light as bird bones, calloused but shaking. Eli helped her to her feet, supporting her as she clutched the baby close. Together, they walked back to his horse, the mare shifting uneasily at the unfamiliar scent. Eli lifted her onto the saddle, the baby nestled between them. He started walking, leading the horse toward his ranch, the sun beating down on all three of them. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out, a harsh, lonely sound that echoed across the plains. Eli glanced back once, half expecting to see riders coming after them. But there was nothing, only the wide, empty land and the quiet weight of the choice he'd just made. As they crested the ridge, his ranch came into view, weathered fences, a low barn, the modest cabin he'd built with his own hands. It didn't look like much, but as he helped her down from the saddle, Eli felt the world shift, just a fraction. As if this woman and her baby had carried something with them that would change everything. He looked at her again, at those hollow eyes that still held a glimmer of fight. "I reckon you'll need a name," he said quietly, though he knew she couldn't answer. The wind picked up, swirling dust around their boots, and for the first time in years, Eli Cade didn't feel so alone. Far off on the horizon, storm clouds were gathering. The first night passed in silence. Eli had cleared a space in his cabin, laying a bedroll near the stove where the woman could rest with the baby. She'd eaten the stew he set in front of her, though carefully, as though unsure if she was allowed to. The baby suckled weakly before drifting into a shallow, fitful sleep. Eli sat in the corner with his back to the wall, chair tipped against the doorframe, rifle resting across his knees. He told himself he was just being cautious. Truth was, he couldn't stop watching her. She barely moved except to check the baby. Every so often her hand would brush against her mouth, fingers tracing the scar where her tongue had been, as if still shocked by its absence. Eli didn't sleep much. By morning, the unease he'd pushed aside began to settle in heavy. He knew what folks in Archer's Bend would say if they saw her here. He knew the danger of harboring a woman like her. Comanche, maybe Apache, with a baby no white man would claim. Still, as the first light spilled through the cracks of the shutters, Eli boiled coffee and ladled out more stew. She took it with a nod, eyes lowered. "You got a name?" he asked out of habit, forgetting she couldn't answer. Her lips parted, but again, nothing. Just a soft rasp of air. Eli exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, I can't just call you, hey you, now can I?" He studied her a moment. Her eyes were dark, steady, and far older than her face suggested. "How about Mara?" he said at last. She blinked, as though testing how it felt to be named again. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Mara it is," Eli said, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. The baby stirred in her arms, letting out a thin whimper. Mara rocked her gently, and Eli noticed how her gaze softened as she looked at the child. The quiet moment didn't last long. By noon, 2 riders appeared on the horizon. Neighbors, Ben Maddox and his son Luke. Both men had helped Eli mend fence lines and run cattle before. Good men, mostly. But the sight of Mara and the baby in Eli's yard stopped them cold. Ben swung down first, his weathered face tightening. "Eli," he said slowly, "what in God's name is that?" Eli straightened from where he'd been chopping wood. "Found her out near Salt Creek. Alone. Near dead." Ben's eyes flicked to Mara, who held the baby close and lowered her head. "She's Injun," Ben said flatly. "Ain't no good come from keeping one of them under your roof." Luke shifted in his saddle, uneasy. "Pa, maybe she just needs help." Ben shot him a look that shut him up quick. Eli leaned on the axe handle, jaw tightening. "She's got a baby, Ben. They'd both died out there." Ben stepped closer. "You take her in, and you'll bring hell on all of us. You think her people won't come looking? You think they'll ask nice before they burn this place down?" Eli didn't answer right away. He could feel Mara's eyes on him, though she didn't speak, couldn't speak. Ben shook his head. "Best thing you can do is ride her back to town. Marshal Dugan'll know what to do. He'll send word to the fort. Let the army handle it." Eli's stomach turned at the thought. He'd seen what the army did with captives. Luke shifted again, looking between them. "Pa, she's got a kid." "Maybe." "Quiet," Ben snapped. Eli glanced at Mara, who tightened her grip on the baby, as if she understood exactly what was being discussed. He thought about the warnings he'd heard in town, rumors of raids, whispers of vengeance. But then he looked at Mara, really looked at her, thin, exhausted, scarred in ways no one deserved, and he knew there wasn't any decision to make. "She stays," Eli said finally. Ben's mouth opened, then closed, his face darkening. You've gone soft, Cade. Ain't no room for mercy out here. Mercy gets folks killed. Eli didn't flinch. Maybe, but not today. For a long moment, no one moved. Finally, Ben spat in the dirt. Don't say I didn't warn you. He mounted up, jerking his head for Luke to follow. As they rode off, Ben's voice carried back on the wind. Town's gonna hear about this. You best be ready. Eli watched them go, shoulders tense. When he turned back, Mara was staring at him, not with fear, but something else. Gratitude. Maybe. You're safe here, he said quietly, knowing she couldn't reply. But her eyes said enough. That night, the wind shifted. Somewhere far out in the dark, coyotes yipped, and Eli found himself listening harder than usual, because this time, it didn't sound like coyotes at all. The following days passed in uneasy quiet. Mara moved through Eli's cabin like a shadow, tending the baby, mending what little she could with scraps of cloth Eli dug out of a trunk. She rarely looked at him directly, but every time she did, Eli felt that same hollow ache in his chest, the one that came when a man realized he was the only lifeline someone had left. But word in the hills traveled fast. By the fourth day, Eli spotted riders on the ridge. Not just one or two, half a dozen men, armed, watching his ranch from a distance. He didn't need to see their faces to know they were from Archer's Bend. That evening, Luke Maddox came alone, slipping through the dusk as if he didn't want to be seen. He dismounted near the barn, jaw tight. Paws riled up the others. Luke said low. They're saying you're keeping a savage woman here. Folks are scared. Talk is, they might come tomorrow night. Try and take her. Eli clenched his fists. And do what? Hand her over to the marshal. Luke hesitated. Or worse. You know how folks get when fear gets hold of them. From inside the cabin came the soft whimper of the baby. Mara stood in the doorway, clutching her child, eyes darting between the two men. Luke met Eli's gaze. I don't want no part of this, Cade. But you ought to know, they've sent word to the fort too. If the soldiers ride out, they won't ask questions. Eli felt the ground shift under him. The army wouldn't care that Mara had been mutilated, or that she was just a mother with a child. To them, she'd be nothing but a hostile captive. After Luke rode off, the land grew too quiet. Even the coyotes held their tongues. That night, Eli sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, staring into the dark. The wind carried faint sounds, a rhythm too steady to be the breeze. Distant hoofbeats. More than one horse. Mara appeared in the doorway, her face pale in the lantern light. She stepped out, baby cradled close. Her eyes asked the question she couldn't voice. They're coming, Eli said softly. Far off, torchlight began to flicker on the ridge. First 2, then 5, then more. Eli rose, heart pounding. He wasn't a man who liked fighting. He'd done enough of it in the war to last a lifetime. But he knew if they took Mara tonight, she'd never see another sunrise. He turned to her. You need to stay inside. Whatever happens, don't open that door. She shook her head, gripping his sleeve, eyes wide. I'll keep you safe, he said, forcing the words out even though he didn't know if it was true. The hoofbeats grew louder. Men's voices carried on the wind, low and angry. Eli stepped off the porch, rifle in hand, boots sinking into the dry earth. The torches were closer now, 15 riders, maybe more, all moving as one. When they reined up at the edge of his yard, the night felt like it was holding its breath. Ben Maddox was at the front. Step aside, Cade, he called, voice sharp. We're taking her. Town won't stand for this. Eli leveled the rifle, not aiming yet, but steady. Ain't nobody taking her from this land. Don't be a fool. She's Comanche. You think they'll thank you when her people come? You think you're saving anyone? Eli took a slow step forward. She's a mother. That's all I need to know. Behind Ben, one of the men spat in the dirt. Then you'll die for her? Eli didn't answer. The standoff stretched long and thin. The torches hissed in the wind. Horses shifted nervously, sensing the tension. From the cabin, Mara's silhouette appeared in the window, the baby's tiny hand pressed against the glass. Ben's jaw tightened. Last chance, Cade. Move. Eli exhaled slowly. You want her, You'll have to come through me. The riders shifted in their saddles. Hands moved to rifles. And then, just as the first man started to reach for his reins, another sound split the night. War drums. Faint at first, then louder. From the dark hills beyond the ranch, shapes began to move. Dozens. Maybe more. Ben's torchlight caught on painted faces and feathers, the glint of steel and stone-tipped spears. The Comanche had arrived. Every man froze. Eli's grip on the rifle tightened. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. The night air seemed to grow heavier with every beat of the drums. They came from beyond the ridge, slow and deliberate, the sound of something inevitable drawing closer. The men on horseback turned in their saddles, eyes wide, voices breaking in whispers that carried panic. Ben Maddox cursed under his breath. "Damn it, Cade, you've brought them right to our door." Eli didn't move. His rifle stayed steady, though his heart pounded like a hammer. Out of the darkness, figures emerged, warriors, their faces painted, weapons glinting faintly in the torchlight. There were more than a dozen, maybe 20, and they rode with the quiet assurance of men who had nothing to fear. One broke away from the group and rode forward slowly. He was older, broad-shouldered, with long gray braids and a necklace of carved bone. His expression was unreadable as he looked at the scene before him. The torches, the rifles, the woman standing at the cabin window clutching her child. Ben shifted in his saddle, hand inching toward his gun. "We can't fight 'em all." Eli stepped forward before anyone could do something foolish. He lowered his rifle but didn't set it down. The older warrior's gaze fixed on him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Mara appeared in the doorway, the baby in her arms. She stepped down slowly, her bare feet silent on the dirt. "Stay back," Eli whispered, but she kept walking. Her eyes stayed locked on the older warrior. Even from where Eli stood, he saw the tremor in her hands, the way her breath hitched as though she was forcing herself to move. The warrior's eyes softened when he looked at her. He dismounted, walking forward with a gravity that silenced every man in the yard. Mara stopped a few paces away. She shifted the baby in her arms and, with shaking hands, reached out. She pressed her palm flat to her chest, then extended it toward him. The gesture was simple, but the meaning was clear. The warrior looked at her for a long, heavy moment. Then his gaze moved to Eli. "She is my blood," he said at last, his English halting but firm. "My daughter." A ripple moved through the men from archers. Content truncated due to size limit. Use line ranges to read in chunks.